Tonight on POLITICAT, no deal. The U.S. withdraws from the Iran nuclear agreement.
Shipping out, NATO returns to the North Atlantic.
And boiling point, we'll talk about recent unrest in Latin America.
All that and more on POLITICAT. It's your politics right now. Good evening and welcome to POLITICAT. I'm Michelle Beck.
And I'm Justin Sweetwood. We'll have those stories and more, but first, our headlines of the week. Primary elections are being held in Ohio, West Virginia, and Indiana tonight. Several hotly contested nominations will be decided, including the Republican candidate to challenge Indiana Democratic Senator Joe Donnelly and the Republican candidate for outgoing Ohio Governor John Kasich's seat. One source of controversy is Republican candidate Don Blankenship, running for the nomination to try to unseat West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. Many have accused Blankenship's ads of being racist, some of which directed at Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and his family.
The New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman resigned abruptly last night after several women accused him of physical assault. In a statement, Schneiderman said that he, quote, strongly contests these allegations. He said that these accusations nevertheless will prevent him from leading the office. First reported by The New Yorker, 2 of the 4 women claimed that he repeatedly hit them, often after drinking and in bed without their consent. The state's highest-ranking law enforcement officer has been a vocal proponent of the Me Too movement. He notably took legal action against Harvey Weinstein.
Last Tuesday, thousands of Puerto Ricans marched on the capital of San Juan to protest government austerity measures. 13 people were arrested as police used gas and pepper spray on demonstrators. The U.S. territory has been in economic recession for 11 years and is currently about $72 billion in debt. A federal control board will close 280 of 1,100 public schools and make cuts to pensions and other benefits. Meanwhile, federal legislators are wondering why power has not been fully restored to the island 8 months after Hurricane Maria, as a new hurricane season nears. The power grid was nearly 80% destroyed by the storm, which was poorly maintained for years.
President Trump announced today that the United States and its allies will be withdrawing from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal. The president campaigned on a promise to pull out of the deal, calling it, quote, a disaster and one-sided. Today, he made that campaign promise into policy. The deal was signed in 2015 under the Obama administration and certified by the UN. The framework eased economic sanctions against Iran in return for Iran ceasing its nuclear weapons program for the next 15 years. Today's announcement comes weeks after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu presented a load of files he said Israeli intelligence smuggled out of Iran, allegedly showing evidence that Iran had lied about working on a nuclear weapon in 2003, 12 years before the Iran deal was agreed upon. And here to tell us more about this, we've got our panel tonight, Erica Snow, managing editor of the Daily Northwestern, and immigration reporter Mariana Alfaro. Mariana, Erica, thank you for joining us. So Erica, let's start with you. The question on a lot of people's minds is whether the Trump administration has good cause for withdrawing from the deal, or whether this is just another piece of Obama's legacy that Trump is intent on erasing. What do you think?
Well, this definitely was one of the biggest things of Obama's administration, one of his keystone accomplishments. And I think it's no surprise that Trump is planning to withdraw. It's something, like you've mentioned, that he has promised for years now. And I think for a lot of his supporters, this is a long time coming. And we'll have to see what's coming up here soon. We've had Great Britain, Germany, and France issue statements condemning this action and encouraging Iran not to retaliate too strongly. So we'll still have to see in the coming weeks how Iran reacts to this and what will happen with trade in terms of these other countries.
Yeah, Mariana, what do you think?
I mean, this is another campaign promise that he has actually accomplished. Kind of makes you think how much of it is just rhetoric and trying to make his base feel good about what he's doing, but at the same time you can see all these people, both from the Obama administration and just experts on the topic, as well as like people over at the EU freaking out about it, saying it's not a well thought out idea. So at first there was going to be like a soft pullout, or like a, he wasn't going to go hard on it, but now we don't really know what's going to happen. In the end, it's, to me, another rhetoric issue where we're doing this because it makes us look good, at least to our base.
Now, Mariana, we're going to stay with you. Now, Every single Republican voted against the original Iran deal, and now that they have their wish, do you think they'll be held accountable for whatever happens next?
I mean, again, it's a lot of maybe misinformed decisions or decisions that have been taken to please a certain part of the voter base, but not probably taken with the most research done or the most thought put into it, because we don't really have a post plan. We don't know what we're going to do after. So it's wait and see. But again, it's probably another thing done just to like piece out some people.
And Erica?
I think it's interesting to note that Trump's original advisors did strongly discourage him from pulling out of the deal. Even up to weeks and days ago, he was encouraged not to pull out of the Iran deal. But Trump has since replaced a lot of his top advisors with people who support him and have encouraged him to pull out of the deal. So I think there is a lot of support for the status quo in terms of he was really being encouraged not to pull out for the past few weeks. So I think it'll be interesting to see if voters really do attribute any changes with Iran to Trump pulling out of the deal. I think a lot of times it is very confusing for voters to keep up with foreign policy and who negotiated what. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how voters attribute success or failure in this initiative.
Okay, Erica. Under President Trump, the United States has pulled out of the Paris Agreement, the TPP. He's threatened to tear up NAFTA, and now this. What damage might these withdrawals do to the long-term reputation of the United States and its accountability?
I think this really shows that Trump differs from a lot of previous presidents in that he favors more of a realist approach rather than a liberal approach, where he sees that countries are constantly in competition with each other, and he doesn't necessarily value international organizations or negotiations with lots of other countries. So I think it just shows he has a completely different worldview in terms of comparative and international politics. So I think this will just be another cornerstone, something that Trump will be remembered by, of how he deals with other countries, and that is very aggressively.
And I think it also brings us back to this whole idea that Trump is isolating the United States more. You know, pulling out of all these things kind of makes it America first. And do we really want to be in a place where it's America first? Don't know yet. What the effects of that will be, don't know yet. But it definitely is a move towards we're going to focus on ourselves instead of continuing all these international agreements that we're pulling out of.
Thank you, guys. After the announcement today, several world leaders issued statements in support of the deal, urging Trump to reconsider, including former President Obama, who said the decision to withdraw is, quote, a serious mistake. We'll have more on the Iran deal and more from our panel after this break.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
Welcome back to PolitiCat. We've got more to talk about with our guests, but first, Justin has our weekly Red, White, and Green, the segment where we look at the connection between politics and money. Justin?
Thanks, Michelle. Now, as you've been heading to the gas station, you might have noticed that your bill is getting higher and higher of late, and last Monday, oil even reached over $70 per barrel for the first time since 2014. This has in part been due to anticipation of President Trump renouncing the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, and today he followed through, officially stating that the U.S. is pulling out of the deal, which he described as, quote, one-sided. Prices turned positive while Trump was speaking today, but were down as much as 4.4% following Monday's spike. Since the beginning of this year, U.S. oil has increased in price by over 15%, also due to demand and supply cuts by OPEC and Russia. Iran is OPEC's third largest oil producer and exports 2.5 million barrels a day, with the global demand standing at nearly 100 million. Renewed sanctions are expected to curb those numbers, but there will be a wind-down period of 90 to 180 days before such sanctions come into place. Under the same time frame, European companies will have to limit their activities and imports from Iran or face conflict with the American banking system. Some experts say that Iranian production will not significantly be impacted unless other European allies impose similar sanctions, and oil prices might come back down once everyone realizes Iran isn't reducing production. Back to the desk.
Thanks, Justin. The United States Navy announced this weekend that it will reactivate the Second Fleet and launch a second command in effort to combat Russian activity in the Atlantic. The Navy will establish the command out of Norfolk, Virginia for the first time since it was merged with the General Naval Fleet in 2011. This move comes after several years of increased Russian activity in the Atlantic, particularly around the Baltic states, as well as recent aggression in Crimea and Georgia. So let's bring back our panel, Mariana Alfaro and Erica Snow. Mariana, to start with you, the Trump administration has faced a lot of heat for its refusal to enforce sanctions against Russia and denounce Russian President Vladimir Putin. Is this a new tactic in dealing with Russia?
I guess this is, again, I mean, this was said a few years ago. They took it out, the specific base, and I guess this is the first big move we've seen to kind of show that the U.S. is not going to let Russia go around and do these things. But at the same time, how much of an effect is going to have? Like, is this like a soft blow we're putting out there? Is this just like showing our power and kind of just trying to keep things at ease? Or is it more of the U.S. Actually starting to counterattack all these things that have been going on? But again, this was a fleet that was already there, and I think removed in the last 10 years. So it really probably wasn't that much of an effort to put it back up.
Erica?
I think to me, what symbolized the most is this return in rhetoric to Cold War-esque types of talking of the U.S. and top defense officials saying that Russia is aggressive and we're returning to a great power struggle. That, I think, is raising a lot of red flags for a lot of observers that will this escalate tensions? Will this lead to any military action? Just the fact that the U.S. is acknowledging that Russia is a great power against us is something that I think makes a lot of people uneasy and brings us back to some Cold War tensions. Definitely a throwback.
Now, the Second Fleet was decommissioned in 2011 under former President Obama, and during that time, Russia majorly expanded its military capabilities. Now, Erica, this begs the question, did the Obama administration fail to curb the Russian threat?
I think it's really hard to attribute blame to any one person or administration, but I think this is something that's been rising for several years, especially as Robert Mueller continues to investigate Russian ties into the 2016 election. So depending on what he finds, I think it'll be hard to say that Obama let this happen or didn't fully fight back against Russia, because if so, there's been some sort of Russian intervention in American politics for some time now. So I think we'll just have to wait and see. Like with many defense stories, this is something that builds over several years, and it's really important to note when rhetoric changes like this.
Again, yeah, I agree. You can't really blame it on someone, or like the Obama administration perhaps had other reasons to take it off. Again, we can't know until we see any action from their part, but it does seem to me just like a soft blow that just kind of like a PR move even. So I can't be convinced until I see any action from their side.
But on the other hand, could this move be a sort of band-aid solution to the larger problem of Russian aggression, considering the myriad of ways that Russia is exerting influence around the world?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. It's a band-aid solution, and I guess I would like to see more action in other areas where we are freaking out about Russia. This might be not the first thing my mind would go to.
Okay.
And I think, I don't know, we hope that extra military fleets will never have to be used. We hope that Russian ballistic submarines will never be able to reach or harm the East Coast. So I don't think the average American is really watching this and worrying, but we'll again have to wait and see how Russia counteracts this measure. But it's definitely worthwhile to note that we're reviving this second fleet that's definitely been under wraps for several years.
All right, Erica, thank you very much, and we'll have more POLITICAT after the break. Stay tuned.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
Go Northwest and break right through that with our colors flying. We will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
Welcome back to POLITICAT. Let's go now to David Gernon from politicsandpolicy.org with this week's 2-in-1. David?
Thanks, Justin. Welcome to the 2-in-1. Politics and Policies look at two stories that deserve more attention and one that deserves a little less. If at first you don't succeed, try again. At least that's the idea behind Sprint and T-Mobile's latest move. T-Mobile has agreed to buy Sprint, currently owned by SoftBank, for about $26 billion, following years of on-again, off-again negotiations. The combined company, operating under the T-Mobile brand, hopes the move will allow them to get a jump start on building a next-generation wireless network, usually referred to as 5G. It will also reduce America's wireless industry from 4 major players to 3, meaning the deal will be under heavy scrutiny from regulators. T-Mobile and Sprint are significantly smaller than their larger rivals, Verizon and AT&T, but this combination should allow the new company to challenge those two. Previous attempts between T-Mobile and Sprint collapsed after the two sides could not agree on how to structure control of the new company. In this edition, the CEO will be current T-Mobile boss John Laguerre, while the board will include SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son. For our second story this week, we turn to an independence group finally giving up arms. The Basque separatist group ETA, which stands for Basque Country and Freedom in the Basque language, announced it has completely dissolved, ending a 50-year guerrilla campaign that has killed around 850 people. This represents the final chapter in the gradual demise of the group, which lost most popular support in recent years. ETA was formed by students in 1959 to combat the repressive dictator Francisco Franco. Its most infamous moment occurred in 1973 when it assassinated Spanish Prime Minister Luis Carrero Blanco. The group led fierce resistance to General Franco's military dictatorship, which banned the use of the Basque language. Franco's death in 1975 led to gains for moderate Basques, who today have their own parliament, police force, and education system. Despite that, the ETA kept up their hardline views and violent methods, leading to erosion in popular support for the group. Now for a story that has gotten a little too much press. Last Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a PowerPoint presentation he said proved conclusively Iran lied about its nuclear ambitions, saying the nuclear deal is based on lies. Unfortunately, the info Netanyahu put forth is data everyone already knew. Much of it appears based on a report published by the International Atomic Energy Agency in 2011. The majority of the slides presented show evidence from 1999 to 2003, well before the Iran deal was signed. The world already knows of Netanyahu's opposition to the Iran deal. What could he have gained from such a performance? Well, perhaps he was aware President Trump is making his decision on whether to pull out this week, and by covering Netanyahu, the media is giving him exactly what he wants. That's the 2-in-1. Be sure to check out politicsandpolicy.org for more. Back to you.
Thanks, David. Beginning April 19th, Nicaraguan university students and other protesters have been facing off against the government. The protests began after unpopular changes to the nation's social security system, but it blew up after the deaths of several student protesters. The demonstrations grew to include other grievances. The Permanent Committee on Human Rights has estimated the death toll at 63 protesters. The Nicaraguan government has not updated the official death count since the third day of protests, when they had counted 10 in total. Now, these protests are the biggest reaction against President Ortega since he was re-elected in 2007. Former supporters are now accusing him of corruption and repression and are demanding that he leave office. Now let's turn back to our panel for more. Mariana, let's start with you. How do you think that these protests in the region will affect the stability in the larger region? And could we be seeing a movement similar to the Arab Spring here?
So that's kind of, I've seen that comparison online a lot, and I honestly don't think this is going to go into an Arab Spring situation, mostly because Nicaragua, for the rest of Central America, it's kind of like a distant, like it's an extreme. Not gonna lie that El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala have had instability in the last few years, particularly Honduras and Guatemala, but Nicaragua, what we're seeing right now is a regime that has been going on for years, and that's not something that I could say has been happening in the other, I'm excluding Costa Rica and Panama, but it's not something that we've seen in the Northern Triangle in the last few years. At the same time, I think it's bringing some sort of awareness into Central America and just kind of how the effects of these kinds of regimes are having on very small countries with people who don't have a solid political governmental base as larger countries in Latin America do. But I guess that awareness is important, mostly because elections are coming up in El Salvador, elections are coming up across the region, and Nicaragua, I would say, is like the extreme. We don't want it to get to that point in other countries, in Central America particularly.
Erica, what are your thoughts?
I think it's really important, like you noted, that that death tolls are kind of unreliable at this point. I think it's really important as people in the United States trying to follow this that we pay special attention to what we're reading and where it's coming from. And if we're hearing something from government sources, that we're noting that and noting that it's probably unreliable, since they're more inclined to underreport deaths and injuries and things like that, and many deaths still remain unconfirmed and autopsies not performed and things like that. So unfortunately, it's one of those things that lots of readers just have to consume as much information as possible about, since there's lots of conflicting information out there.
Thanks, Erica. Now, yesterday, several pro-government lawmakers set up a truth commission to investigate the student deaths. The 5-member panel will report back within 3 months. However, Committee on Human Rights leader Marco Carmona said that, quote, "We cannot trust that there will be an objective investigation." Now, what is President Ortega trying to accomplish here with a commission that some see is very flawed from the start?
I think that this really is kind of a grab at credibility, or he's trying to push that he's taking some sort of measure to curb violence and establish trust with the people. But I think a lot of protesters especially are really upset about this, because how can you trust the government to have its own oversight over itself in these very violent protests, when a lot of protesters are accusing the government of inciting a lot of this violence. So I'm very skeptical of these commissions, just because they're coming from the government itself, and in unstable regimes it's really difficult to trust that.
I agree, and especially because the Ortega government has been going on for so long. They have so much power. They have taken, freedom of the press. They have taken over organizations that would usually conduct a semi-transparent investigation like this, which is why I believe that outside organizations have to take the lead on these things. The UN, the countries that fund Nicaragua, the countries that donate to the country, have to come in and say, we need to have a hand in this, because I have very little faith that the Ortega government could do anything remotely transparent regarding this issue.
Now, during a televised speech, Ortega said that right-wing factions want to, quote, destroy Nicaragua's good image that has cost us so much to build. However, the government itself has cracked down pretty violently on protesters, resulting in all the deaths that we're hearing about. Erica, should the U.S. or the international community intervene?
I think it's really tricky to try to push U.S. intervention at this time, especially under Trump. I don't think him and his administration would be for any government intervention here, especially just knowing the United States' history in the region of sponsoring regime overthrows. I think it would be really tricky to try to gain some public support for that. So I think at this point, it's also still very recent with the protests breaking out last month. So I'd say at least at this point the U.S. needs to stay out of it, if not for as long as this endures.
Yeah, I honestly would not support U.S. Meddling with this right now, particularly under the administration we are in here. there is a history of the United States just really going in Central America, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, and doing things that now we are really frowning upon. So that's why I call on the rest of the international community. Like, there's many powerful countries in Latin America who could take a stand in this, probably not the United States for now.
Thank you, ladies, and stay tuned for the final word on PolitiCat.
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
The views expressed in this segment are not necessarily the views of NNN or Northwestern University. They are the views of the PolitiCat editorial staff. Whereas most of the United States has been consumed by the president's private affairs or his administration's scandals this week, tonight we've turned our attention to the news that we believe matter. As we just discussed, protesters in Nicaragua were murdered in violent demonstrations. Many of them were students. According to the BBC, the Nicaraguan government stopped updating the death toll after 10 people were killed in the first 3 days. Human rights groups said that around 63 people were dead. Individual lives and stories were lost, but make that number 63. That reveals the magnitude of this tragedy. So where are the live shots, the top slot in the evening news, the breaking news notifications? The same questions can be asked for the violent protests in Puerto Rico or the ongoing crisis in Venezuela. Media coverage is a fair reflection of the public's care and concern. With little media coverage, it seems that neither the public cares nor concerns. Now, there should be plenty of reasons for the news to be newsworthy. The body count, a humanitarian viewpoint, American diplomatic involvement. Puerto Rico is a U.S. Commonwealth. In Nicaragua, the United States has played in its politics since 1909. Until 1933, the U.S. had forces present there, and most notably, the Reagan administration in the 80s secretly sold arms to Iran, who in turn sold them to a paramilitary group called the Contras in order to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. Now look at history. The United States has always had a part in Latin American affairs. To U.S., it only makes sense that we cover the important news of our day all around the world, especially when our country is politically involved in it. That just may be the perk of our campus news platform. We can discuss the news that we believe everyone should be informed of and care about. And that's what differentiates us from the news business of the real world.
Thanks, Michelle, and that's our show for tonight. Thank you to our guests, Erica Stone, Mariana Alfaro. I'm Justin Sweetwood.
And I'm Michelle Beck. Thank you for watching PolitiCat. Good night. Okay,